The Dunn report has just provided some staggering numbers that are absolutely blowing my mind. Guys, I had no idea what was happening in Mexico. I mean, Mexico it's become Chinaco. I mean, wow. Literally, Mexico is now buying more cars from China than they are from the United States. It's not even close. And the car market there has been completely transformed over the last few years. I had no idea this was happening. Here are the numbers, and they're quite shocking. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. Great to have you with us. Now, I do own a Chinese EV. I've got an Xpeng G6. I'll have some videos up for you guys soon. I've got new EV tires coming from Hankook going on that car. And I want to see if I can improve the range a little bit. I think I'll be able to with those new tires, new wheels. But anyhow, 1 in every 3 new cars sold in Mexico this year will be built in China. That's up from 4% in 2020. China has 33% of the Mexican car market. How did that even happen? Mexico finds itself quite suddenly awash in Chinese cars. Hundreds of thousands of them, says the Dunn report. America and Canada look at the situation and wonder what exactly is going on in Mexico. Now, Mexico is meant to be a free trade partner with the United States and Canada. So how does this work? Does that mean that these Chinese cars are going to find their way through to the United States? Well, most definitely. Of course they will. I mean, it's inevitable. Necessarily, will they be new? I don't know. They could be used once, potentially. But no matter what the case may be, some of these cars will end up in the United States. Imagine for a moment that you've been appointed to be the independent judge and jury, says the Dunn report. Do you find Mexico guilty? Mexico is secretly building ties with China? Or innocent? Mexico was blindsided. They had no idea what China was planning on doing. What do you guys think? Is it A, guilty, or B, innocent? Or C, is it more complicated? Mexico just didn't realize what was going to happen. Back in 2020, Mexico decided to open the door wider to imports from China. A decree dropped import tariffs on cars from 20% to 0%. There is no import tariffs on Chinese vehicles in Mexico, 0%. The idea was to give Mexican car buyers access to low-cost electric cars. And it worked, maybe too well. Pretty soon, a stream of affordable cars from companies like Chery, Great Wall, and MG arrived in Mexico. No harm, no foul. But then the numbers began to jump. Today, a tsunami of Chinese cars and trucks is pouring into Mexico and flying out of showrooms. Michael Dunn says that the PRC will ship close to 500,000 vehicles to Mexico this year. China has blown past the United States to become Mexico's #1 supplier of cars. 1 of every 3 new cars sold in Mexico this year will be built in China. That's up from only 4% in 2020, 4% to 33%. Now, that's this year. What's that number going to be next year? Could be 50%. Mexico's leaders appear to be frozen in stunned disbelief. They're not sure what to do. I just don't think Mexico was prepared for China's scale and speed, said Travis Bembenek, publisher of the Mexico News Daily. It's pretty crazy, isn't it? Look at these numbers. 2021, 34,000 vehicles. 2025, it's estimated to be 625,000. It might be more than that. I mean, let's be real here. China's not going to send them directly to the United States, so hey, send them to Mexico. Send them through the back door. Mr. Mebanek, a resident in Mexico for more than 20 years, knows his adopted country well, and he's probably right. Yet, says Michael Dunn, the Mexican government seems strangely slow to counter the flood of Chinese imports. In fact, Chinese market momentum seems to be getting stronger by the month. BYD, for one, have some pretty serious plans for Mexico. Take Berkshire Hathaway's invested BYD. China's #1 automaker, they just entered Mexico last year. The company is on track to sell 50,000 cars there this year. 50,000 there this year. But I'm pretty sure they want to do a lot more than that. BYD's Mexican CEO, Jorge Vallejo, says the company plans to double that total to 100,000 in 2025 And I'm assuming they'd like to double that again to 200,000 in 2026. So if you want a Chinese EV, just drive on down to Mexico, drive it back across the border. I mean, technically, you could do that, right? That's not all. Vallejo says that BYD will soon announce the location of a new BYD factory that will build 150,000 cars a year at the start, but I'm going to guess, give it a few years, it'll be building a whole lot more. One veteran Mexican car dealer who just started selling BYDs said he was ecstatic. "I've never sold so many cars in a quarter," he exclaimed. BYD's numbers look even more stunning when compared with industry giants like Toyota. The very arrogant Toyota believes EVs will never be more than 30% of all cars sold worldwide. But it took the world's largest automaker 22 years before it achieved 100,000 sales in Mexico in a single year. 22 years. BYD is going to do it in 2. BYD plans to get there in 36 months. At the same time that Mexico is spending billions on cars imported from China, the country is also exporting a record number of vehicles to the United States. In 2023, Mexico shipped a record 2.2 million cars to America. It is a lucrative business for Mexico that employs tens of thousands. Now, what I see happening is these Chinese car companies will set up subsidiaries in Mexico where they will simply knock up pre-manufactured cars that are shipped over as sort of like a parts box. They'll send over the skateboard, and essentially they'll just have assembly factories in Mexico. They can then, technically, 0% tariffs, send those vehicles into the United States. Mexico is also home to a strong and vibrant parts industry, says Michael Dunn. It is natural to wonder, why would Mexico import so many cars from China when the country is working hard to build its own export-oriented industry? It doesn't make sense, does it? Well, China's surge south of the border has given American leaders those middle-of-the-night sweats. Trump has been freaking out about this, and he's mentioned this. Trump is very aware of what's happening. He's not happy. Mexico is the canary in the coal mine. Earlier this year, the Biden administration imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese imports. President-elect Trump has said he will absolutely block any efforts to bring Chinese cars into America via Mexico. In October, the Department of Commerce added new regulations to ban cars with Chinese hardware or software from being sold in America. But technically at this point in time, as far as I can tell, you can buy a Chinese electric car in Mexico. If you're a US citizen, this is legal to do. Then simply drive it back across the border. Technically, you could do this. Not saying people necessarily will do this en masse, but it could be done. Trump believes that this could happen as well. Now, American politicians and industrial leaders are beginning to complain out loud that Mexico may be less than totally reliable. November the 7th, just 2 days after the election, Trump made clear his displeasure with Mexico. "I'm going to inform her, President of Mexico, on day one that if they do not stop this onslaught of criminals and drugs coming into our country, I'm going to immediately impose a 25% tariff on everything they send to the United States of America." Now, even if you hate Trump, he does have a point here. There certainly is criminals and drugs entering the United States from Mexico. That's simply an obvious fact. Trump isn't alone in his anger as well. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, Canada, recommended potentially removing Mexico from the free trade agreement. Ford said Mexico should at the very least match US and Canadian tariffs on Chinese imports, or they shouldn't have a seat at the table or enjoy access to the largest economy in the world. Tensions are building, says Dunn. America and Canada are not happy. China is quietly delighted. Mexico is under pressure to act. Mexico probably will increase tariffs on Chinese cars, I suspect, and soon. Car exports to America are simply too crucial to the Mexican economy. So if the US and Canada threaten Mexico with import tariffs on Mexican-built vehicles, unless Mexico is willing to basically put a tariff on Chinese EVs, then Mexico will just put a tariff on Chinese EVs. You can almost guarantee it will happen. The 0% decree elapsed in September, so now Chinese cars will face an import duty of 20%. But that's not going to stop the flow. Mexico will match the tariffs of the US and Canada, said the former Mexican ambassador to China, who is now a partner at the DGA group in Washington, D.C., precisely because Mexico wants to protect its own industry, its own supply base. There is a strong auto parts lobby in Mexico pushing for higher tariffs already, right now. But it hasn't happened yet. Mexico did open the door. Chinese automakers flew in. America and Canada are getting nervous. Is Mexico complicit or naive? They wondered. Now, Michael Dunn says this: what happens if Leap Motor, technically a Chinese car company, but now they have a joint venture with Stellantis? What about if they build cars in Mexico? Would you call this a Chinese car company, or would you call Stellantis an American car company? Very interesting here. This kind of scenario could play out in future because Ford and General Motors at some point in time are going to be in an enormous hole, right? Their car sales will dwindle to the point where they'll be selling barely any outside of North America. And they may be forced into a collaboration like Stellantis with Chinese automakers. Then what will happen is we could see the Trojan horse, what's happening to Stellantis right now. How will states like California react when some of the nearly 1 million Chinese cars now running on Mexican roads find their way north across the border? Now, Michael Dunn says he already sees Chinese-built cars with Mexican plates rolling on San Diego highways. Many more will come. Now, if you're wondering, are these car manufacturers just, MG, etc.? No, they're not. The estimated 500,000 exports from China to Mexico this year include vehicles from 15 different brands, plus made in China vehicles from Ford, General Motors, and even Volkswagen. So Ford, GM, and Volkswagen are manufacturing vehicles in China and sending those to Mexico as well. That's kind of an interesting phenomenon. So guys, what are your thoughts on this scenario in Mexico? Could the Mexican government potentially change their mind? If they do impose a 20% tariff, I don't think that's going to prevent these Chinese car makers from entering Mexico and continuing to basically bombard Mexico with Chinese vehicles. To be honest, this is good for Mexican consumers. The truth is they don't have access to these affordable electric cars. America's not making these affordable electric cars. And that, to be honest, the ones that they do make are more expensive and probably not quite as good either. So, I wonder how Mexican consumers will feel about this in the long term. How do you guys see this playing out? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments.